The small town of Riverdale, nestled in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, had sent its sons to every American conflict since the Civil War. The names of the fallen were etched on a granite memorial in the town square, a solemn reminder of sacrifice that generations of schoolchildren passed each day. What made Riverdale unique wasn't its picturesque Main Street or the steel mill that had once been its economic heart. It was the quiet presence of the Army Reserve training facility on its outskirts. For Captain Rebecca Morgan, the facility had been both sanctuary and battlefield. At 32, she had already served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a sniper with the Army Rangers, earning decorations that she kept in a drawer rather than displaying them. Her journey from Riverdale High School valedictorian to elite military sharpshooter had not been what anyone expected, least of all her father, the town's longtime sheriff. "Shooting competition today, Becca?" Sheriff Daniel Morgan asked as he poured his morning coffee. Though retired for 5 years now, he still maintained the early rising habits of his law enforcement days. Rebecca nodded, checking her watch. "Yep, annual qualifier for the reserve unit should be interesting." "Because you'll be running it or because you'll be in it?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Both, actually." She sipped her own coffee, hiding a small smile. "Colonel Wallace finally approved my request to compete as well as supervise, says it will inspire the troops." Her father's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. "The same Colonel Wallace who said women had no place in combat roles when you first transferred to the reserve." "The very same," Rebecca confirmed. "People can change, Dad." "Some do," he acknowledged. "Some need more convincing than others." Rebecca understood his skepticism. Her return to Riverdale after active duty had been challenging. The reserve posting should have been a respite after the intensity of combat deployments, but instead, she'd found herself fighting a different kind of battle, proving her capabilities to commanders who saw her combat experience as an anomaly rather than a qualification. Colonel James Wallace, the facility commander, had been the most resistant. A career officer with traditional views, he had initially relegated Rebecca to administrative roles despite her exceptional field record. It had taken months of persistence, impeccable performance, and the occasional demonstration of her skills to earn assignments that matched her training. The shooting competition would be another such demonstration. An hour later, Rebecca stood at the training facility's shooting range, watching reserve members arrive for the day's event. The annual marksmanship competition was part qualification, part morale-building exercise. Soldiers from various units would demonstrate their skills at different distances and scenarios, with recognition going to top performers. "Captain Morgan," a deep voice greeted her. She turned to find Sergeant Major Paul Hendricks approaching, his weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. At 55, Hendricks was a legend in the facility, 30 years of service, including multiple combat tours. "Sergeant Major," she acknowledged with a nod. "Beautiful day for shooting." "That it is," he surveyed the range. "Heard you're participating as well as running things, that's a first." "Colonel's orders," she replied simply, though they both knew she had pushed for the opportunity. Hendricks studied her for a moment. "Well, it'll be educational for some of these youngsters to see what real skill looks like. Might take the swagger out of a few of them." Rebecca knew exactly who he meant. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper had joined the reserve unit 6 months ago, bringing with him both impressive qualifications and an equally impressive ego. As a former Marine sniper with 2 tours in Iraq, Cooper had skills that Rebecca respected. His attitude toward her, however, was another matter. "Speaking of the devil," Hendricks muttered as Cooper arrived with several other officers. Lieutenant Cooper spotted them and walked over, his confident stride and square shoulders projecting authority. At 34, he was handsome in a rugged way, with short-cropped dark hair and intense blue eyes that missed nothing. "Captain Morgan, Sergeant Major," he greeted them, his tone professionally cordial but with an undercurrent of something else when addressing Rebecca. "Looking forward to today's event." "As am I, Lieutenant," Rebecca replied evenly. "I'll be interested to see how your Marine training translates to our course." A slight smirk touched his lips. "I imagine it will translate just fine, Captain, though I understand you'll be shooting as well as judging. That seems unusual." "Colonel's orders," she repeated, meeting his gaze steadily. "Of course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's always good to have leadership demonstrate what they expect from their troops, even if it's just for show." The implication was clear. He viewed her participation as ceremonial rather than competitive. Before she could respond, Colonel Wallace arrived, and the formalities of the competition began. The first events were standard qualification rounds at various distances. Rebecca performed well but didn't dominate, focusing primarily on her role as supervisor. Cooper, as expected, shot brilliantly, his movements precise and confident. By midday, he had established himself as the clear leader. Next scenario, Rebecca announced to the assembled participants. Simulated urban environment with multiple targets at varying distances. Time and accuracy both factor into scoring. This was where things would get interesting. Urban sniping required not just technical skill, but adaptability and rapid decision-making, qualities Rebecca had honed in Afghanistan's complex terrain. As competitors took turns navigating the course, Rebecca observed Cooper closely. His technique was textbook perfect, his shots landing with impressive consistency. When his turn ended, his score was the highest of the day. "Not bad, Lieutenant," Rebecca acknowledged as he returned from the course, clearly pleased with his performance. "Appreciated, Captain," he replied. "Will you be taking a turn, or is your role purely supervisory today?" There was that tone again, the subtle suggestion that she was more administrator than operator. Several nearby soldiers glanced their way, sensing the tension. "I'll be running the course next," she confirmed, checking her rifle one last time. "Someone has to set the standard after all." Cooper's eyebrows rose slightly at her confidence. "Indeed they do, Captain. We'll all be watching with great interest." As Rebecca moved to the starting position, she was acutely aware of the eyes on her, not just Cooper's but those of every reserve member present. This wasn't Afghanistan, where her skills had spoken for themselves in the most definitive way possible. This was Riverdale, where she was still fighting to be seen as a soldier first and a woman second. The timer started, and Rebecca moved through the course with fluid efficiency. Each target acquired, each shot delivered with precision born from thousands of hours of practice and real-world experience. She didn't rush but maintained a steady rhythm that reflected her personal philosophy of shooting, deliberate speed rather than hurried accuracy. When she finished, the range fell momentarily silent before Sergeant Major Hendricks called out her score. It was 2 points higher than Cooper's, with a slightly faster time. Cooper's face remained impressively neutral as she rejoined the group, but the tightness around his eyes told its own story. "Impressive showing, Captain," he said, his voice carrying to those nearby. "Though I note you had the advantage of watching all previous competitors before taking your turn." The implication of unfair advantage hung in the air. Rebecca felt eyes shift between them, the unspoken challenge clear. "A valid observation, Lieutenant," she replied calmly. "Perhaps we should both run the final scenario blind without observing the other competitors, first position decided by coin toss." She was calling his bluff, and everyone present knew it. The final scenario, long-distance shooting under simulated stress conditions, was the most challenging and would determine the overall winner. Cooper hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'm certainly amenable to that arrangement, Captain. May the best shooter win." "They usually do, Lieutenant," Rebecca replied with the faintest smile. "They usually do." What none of them realized as they prepared for the final challenge was that events far beyond the training facility were about to turn their friendly competition into something far more consequential. A test not just of skill, but of character and courage that would change how they viewed both the mission and each other. The final shooting scenario took place on the facility's longest range, with targets positioned at distances from 400 to 800 yards. The twist that made this challenge particularly difficult was the addition of environmental factors. Variable winds controlled by large fans, sudden noise distractions, and a timer that created pressure to complete all shots within a narrow window. As agreed, a coin toss determined that Cooper would shoot first, with Rebecca and the other observers waiting inside the facility building until called. The lieutenant approached the position with the confident bearing that had become his trademark, adjusting his rifle and settling into position with practiced ease. Inside the waiting area, Rebecca found herself standing with Sergeant Major Hendricks and several other senior non-commissioned officers. "Cooper's good," Hendricks commented quietly. "One of the best technical shooters I've seen in years." "Agreed," Rebecca replied honestly. His fundamentals are exceptional. Hendricks studied her for a moment, but... Rebecca considered her words carefully. But he shoots like someone who's never had to question his right to be behind a rifle. There's a looseness that comes with that kind of confidence. And you don't have that looseness? Hendricks asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Women in combat roles can't afford it, she said simply. We don't get the benefit of the doubt. Their conversation was interrupted by the range officer announcing Cooper's score, an impressive 48 out of 50 possible points, with excellent time. As Rebecca prepared to take her turn, Hendricks offered a final observation. You know, Captain, some battles aren't won with a rifle. Sometimes it's about changing minds one shot at a time. Rebecca nodded, understanding his meaning as she headed toward the door that would lead her to the range. Just as she reached for the handle, her phone vibrated. Normally, she would ignore it during training, but the special vibration pattern indicated a priority message. Checking quickly, she found a text from the facility's command center. Code Amber, all OFFICERS report, confirmed emergency. Rebecca immediately altered course, heading for the command building with quick strides. Code Amber meant a civilian emergency requiring military assistance, something beyond the capacity of local first responders. She arrived at the command center simultaneously with Cooper and several other officers. Colonel Wallace was already there, speaking urgently with civilian officials on a video call. When he turned to address the assembled officers, his expression was grave. 20 minutes ago, there was a structural collapse at the Riverdale Community Center, he began without preamble. A portion of the roof caved in during a senior citizens event. There are at least 30 people trapped, with multiple injuries reported. Rebecca felt her heart drop. Her father often attended morning coffee gatherings at the center with his retired colleagues. Local fire and rescue are on scene, Wallace continued, but they've requested our assistance due to the complexity of the situation. The building's unstable with risk of further collapse. He turned to a map display. We're activating the reserve unit's engineering team and medical personnel for immediate deployment. Additionally, I need experienced marksmen. Here, he looked directly at Rebecca and Cooper. Sir, Cooper questioned. Parts of the structure are hanging by literal threads, steel cables and rebar that could give way at any moment, Wallace explained. Fire Chief Lawson has requested precision shooters who can sever specific support elements on command, allowing controlled movement of debris without endangering the trapped civilians. Rebecca immediately grasped the concept. It was a technique sometimes used in urban rescue operations, though rarely with such high stakes. Captain Morgan, Lieutenant Cooper, as our top marksman, you'll deploy with the first response team. Sergeant Major Hendricks will coordinate from here. Questions? There were none. Within minutes, Rebecca and Cooper were in a vehicle heading toward town, along with medics and engineers. Their rifles, thankfully still at hand from the competition, were secured beside them. Have you done anything like this before? Cooper asked as they sped toward Riverdale, his earlier competitive edge replaced by professional focus. Twice in Afghanistan, Rebecca replied. Buildings collapsed after IED attacks, Once in Baghdad, hospital structural failure. He checked his rifle methodically. It's different when it's your hometown. Rebecca nodded, trying not to think about whether her father was among those trapped. She tried calling, but service was spotty with emergency channels prioritized. They arrived to find chaos barely contained. Emergency vehicles surrounding the community center, a partial collapse visible on the eastern side of the building. Chief Lawson, a burly man with 30 years of firefighting experience, met them at the perimeter. Thank God you're here, he greeted them, leading the way toward a command post. We've got people trapped in the East Wing. Building shifted 10 minutes ago, nearly took out 2 of my rescue workers. He pointed to a diagram hastily drawn on a tablet. The main support beam is compromised but still holding. Problem is, we can't reach it to place controlled charges for removal. It's pinning down access to where most of the victims are located. And you need us to shoot it? Cooper asked, studying the diagram. Not the beam itself. It's too thick, Lawson clarified. There are 3 cables still creating tension on the wrong side. If you can sever them in the right sequence, the beam should shift away from the collapse zone, opening an access route for our rescue teams. Rebecca analyzed the situation quickly. We'd need elevated positions with clear sightlines to all three cables. Already identified, Lawson said, pointing to neighboring buildings. We've cleared them for your use, but I need to be clear this has to be perfect. Wrong sequence or inaccurate shots, and we could bring down the rest of that section on top of the people trapped inside. We understand, Rebecca assured him, exchanging glances with Cooper. Whatever tension had existed between them at the range was now irrelevant. This was a mission, and lives depended on their performance. They split up to take their positions, Cooper in an office building to the north, Rebecca in an apartment complex to the east. Each would be responsible for different cables, with the final, most difficult shot assigned to Rebecca based on her position's better angle. As she set up her rifle on the roof of the apartment building, Rebecca's training took over, checking wind, calculating distances, establishing communication with the command post. From her elevated position, she could see into portions of the damaged community center, glimpsing rescue workers carefully navigating the precarious interior. Morgan in position, she reported through her radio. I have visual on target cables 2 and 3. Cooper in position, came the lieutenant's voice. Visual on cable 1 confirmed. Chief Lawson's voice followed. Stand by for sequence confirmation from structural engineer. While waiting, Rebecca scanned the crowd of worried onlookers gathered behind the safety perimeter. With relief, she spotted her father, not among the trapped, but helping organize fellow townspeople to support the rescue effort. The sheriff might be retired, but his instincts remained intact. Attention shooters, came the engineer's voice over the radio. Confirmed sequence is as follows. Cable 1 first, followed by Cable 2 after a 5-second delay, then Cable 3 immediately after visual confirmation of movement. Cooper copies, came the immediate response. Morgan copies, Rebecca confirmed, adjusting her position slightly for the perfect angle on Cable 2. You are cleared to fire on my mark, Lawson announced. 3, 2, 1 mark. The crack of Cooper's rifle echoed across the downtown area. Through her scope, Rebecca saw Cable 1 separate cleanly. Cable 1 severed, clean cut, she reported, already transitioning her aim to Cable 2. 5 seconds felt simultaneously eternal and instantaneous. Fire 2, came the command. Rebecca squeezed the trigger, feeling the familiar recoil as her rifle discharged. Cable 2 snapped precisely where targeted. Cable 2 down, shifting to 3, she reported, making the critical adjustment for her final shot. This would be the most difficult. Cable 3 was partially obscured by debris, requiring her to thread the bullet through a narrow gap. Stand by, the engineer cautioned. Monitoring movement. Structure is shifting as expected. Prepare for final shot on my command. Rebecca controlled her breathing, finding the calm center that had served her through combat zones and crisis situations. The perfect stillness that allowed her to block out everything except the target. Fire 3 now. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew true, severing the final cable with surgical precision. Immediately, a groaning sound filled the air as the compromised beam shifted away from the collapse zone. It's working, Lawson's excited voice came through the radio. Rescue teams move in now. Access route is opening. Rebecca maintained her position, watching through her scope as rescue personnel rushed into the newly accessible area. Within minutes, they began helping injured people out of the building, elderly community members, many of whom Rebecca had known her entire life. Captain Morgan, Cooper's voice came through her radio, professional and direct. Excellent shooting. Requesting you maintain overwatch position while I join the ground team for potential additional support. Copy that, she replied, understanding the logic. With his Marine background, Cooper had additional training in structural assessment that could be valuable inside. For the next 2 hours, Rebecca remained at her post, providing regular updates on structural shifts visible from her elevated position. The rescue operation proceeded methodically, with each survivor extracted bringing visible relief to the gathered community. When the final all-clear was given, Rebecca packed her rifle and headed down to join the ground teams. The scene at street level was one of organized chaos, ambulances departing with the injured, rescue workers debriefing, community members embracing loved ones. As she approached the command post to report in, Rebecca noticed a group of rescue workers and civilians looking in her direction, their expressions a mixture of relief and something else. respect, perhaps, or gratitude. Among them was her father, standing tall despite his age, pride evident in his stance. Chief Lawson stepped forward to meet her. "Captain Morgan," he said, his voice carrying to those nearby, "your shooting today was nothing short of remarkable. You and Lieutenant Cooper saved lives that we couldn't have reached otherwise." "Just doing my job, Chief," she replied, the standard response of soldiers everywhere. "No," he said firmly, "you did far more than that. You gave these people a chance when we were running out of options." As Rebecca accepted his thanks, she spotted Cooper emerging from the building, dust-covered but unharmed. Their eyes met across the distance, competitors just hours ago, now bonded by shared purpose and successful mission. What neither of them knew was that their trial by fire had only just begun. While the immediate crisis was resolving, events were unfolding that would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine, and force them to confront not just physical challenges, but the prejudices and assumptions that had defined their relationship from the start. 3 days after the community center rescue, Riverdale was slowly returning to normal. The local newspaper had run front-page coverage of the operation, featuring photos of both Rebecca and Cooper alongside the rescue teams. For Rebecca, the sudden attention was uncomfortable. She had always preferred to let her work speak for itself rather than seek recognition. That morning, as she arrived at the reserve facility, Rebecca noticed a different atmosphere. Soldiers who had previously been professionally cordial but distant now offered genuine greetings. Several stopped to personally thank her for her role in saving their relatives or friends from the community center collapse. "Quite the homecoming reception," observed Sergeant Major Hendricks as he fell into step beside her. "Though I suspect it's not entirely comfortable for you." Rebecca smiled slightly. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you since you were shooting quarter-sized groups at the Junior Rifle Club," he replied. Hendricks had been a friend of her father's for decades and had watched Rebecca grow from determined teenager to decorated soldier. "How's the after-action reporting coming?" she asked, changing the subject to more comfortable territory. "That's actually why I wanted to catch you," Hendricks said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Colonel Wallace has called a special briefing at 900, something about lessons learned from the operation." Rebecca checked her watch. 40 minutes from now. "Any idea what specifically he wants to address?" "Not officially," Hendricks replied carefully, "but Scuttlebutt says he's considering some structural changes to our rapid response protocols based on how well the precision shooting element worked." The briefing room was nearly full when Rebecca arrived. She noticed Cooper already seated near the front, reviewing notes on a tablet. Though they had worked seamlessly during the rescue, they hadn't spoken directly since that day, with after-action debriefings conducted separately according to standard procedure. Colonel Wallace entered precisely at 900, accompanied by several civilian officials Rebecca recognized from the rescue operation, including Chief Lawson. The room came to attention until Wallace waved them back to their seats. "At ease, people," he began. "I've asked Chief Lawson and Mayor Harrington to join us today because what we're discussing affects both military and civilian emergency response in our community." He activated a large display screen showing images from the community center operation. 3 days ago, we demonstrated how effective integration between reserve forces and civilian first responders can be in a crisis situation. The precision shooting component, in particular, proved invaluable in accessing trapped victims safely. Wallace's gaze moved deliberately across the room. "In reviewing our performance, it's become clear that we need to formalize this capability as part of our emergency response protocols. To that end, I'm establishing a new precision response team that will train specifically for these scenarios." Rebecca maintained her neutral expression, though her interest was piqued. This was an unexpected development. "Lieutenant Cooper," Wallace continued, "given your extensive experience in both Marine Corps operations and structural assessment, I'm appointing you as team leader for this new unit." Cooper straightened slightly, his professionalism evident as he responded, "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the assignment." Wallace nodded acknowledgement, then continued, "You'll be selecting 5 additional qualified marksmen from the reserve unit for specialized training. Chief Lawson's team will provide guidance on structural scenarios you're likely to encounter." Rebecca waited for mention of her role, given her equal participation in the rescue, but Wallace moved on to discussing logistics and training schedules. The implication was clear. Despite her performance, she was not being considered for the team leadership position that her qualifications warranted. After the briefing concluded, Rebecca approached Wallace as the room emptied. "Colonel, may I have a word?" "Of course, Captain Morgan," he replied, gathering his materials. "I assume this is about the Precision Response Team." "Yes, sir. I noticed I wasn't mentioned in the staffing assignments, despite having equal or greater experience in precision crisis response compared to Lieutenant Cooper." Wallace's expression remained neutral. "Cooper has specialized training in structural assessment from his time with the Marines that makes him uniquely qualified for this particular role. Your skills are valuable, but I need you continuing your current duties with the General Reserve Training Program." The explanation was reasonable on its surface, but Rebecca recognized the familiar pattern: technical justifications for decisions that ultimately kept women from advancement in certain roles. "With respect, sir, my record includes multiple precision response operations in complex environments. I believe I could contribute significantly to this team." Wallace's expression hardened slightly. "Your contributions are noted, Captain, but my decision stands. Lieutenant Cooper will lead the team, that's all." As Rebecca left the colonel's office, she found Cooper waiting in the hallway, his expression suggesting he'd overheard at least part of the conversation. "Captain Morgan," he acknowledged, "I wanted to speak with you about the new assignment." Rebecca maintained her professional demeanor despite her frustration. "Congratulations on the team lead position, Lieutenant. It's an important initiative." "Thank you," he seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Actually, I wanted to discuss your potential involvement with the team." "This was unexpected." "Oh." "Your performance during the community center operation was exceptional," Cooper admitted. "The shot on the third cable in particular, that was masterful work under pressure." Coming from Cooper, this was significant praise. Rebecca waited for him to continue. "I'll be honest, Captain. When I first transferred here, I had preconceptions about your combat record. I questioned whether your decorations and reputation were perhaps influenced by political considerations." The familiar suggestion that her achievements might be the result of lowered standards or special treatment rather than merit was one Rebecca had encountered throughout her career. "And now," she prompted when he paused. "Now I've seen you work," Cooper said simply. "No one makes shots like those without the real thing: experience, skill, and composure under pressure. Whatever Colonel Wallace has decided about the team leadership, I'd like you involved in some capacity." It was a remarkable shift from their earlier interactions, and Rebecca found herself reassessing her own assumptions about Cooper. Perhaps there was more depth to him than the arrogant former Marine she'd initially perceived. "I appreciate that, Lieutenant," she replied carefully. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "I've been authorized to select team members and structure training. I'd like you to serve as lead instructor for long-distance precision work. Your experience in Afghanistan with similar operations is directly relevant." Rebecca considered the offer. It wasn't team leadership, but it was a meaningful role that would allow her to shape the team's capabilities. "I'd be interested in discussing the specifics," she agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by the facility's alert system. "All available personnel report to Command Center immediately. Repeat, all personnel to Command Center." Exchanging concerned glances, they hurried toward the command building. Inside, they found organized urgency, staff coordinating communications, Sergeant Major Hendricks directing personnel, and Colonel Wallace on a secure line. "What's happening?" Rebecca asked a nearby communications specialist. "Hostage situation at Riverdale High School," came the grim reply. "Armed individuals have barricaded themselves in the East Wing with students and teachers." Rebecca felt a chill. School was in session, with hundreds of teenagers and staff potentially at risk. Many were children of people she'd grown up with, or in some cases, her own former classmates' children. Wallace concluded his call and turned to address the assembled personnel. "We have a critical situation developing. 3 armed individuals have taken control of portions of Riverdale High School following what appears to have been a failed robbery attempt at the nearby bank. They fled to the school when police responded, and now have approximately 60 students and teachers confined in the gymnasium and several classrooms." He pulled up building schematics on the main display. Local police have established a perimeter but lack the tactical capability for this scenario. The FBI hostage rescue team has been activated but is at least 3 hours out. Given the immediate threat, the governor has authorized our reserve unit to provide support under police command. Wallace turned directly to Rebecca and Cooper. Captain Morgan, Lieutenant Cooper, your skills are needed again. The police have requested precision shooters to establish overwatch positions while negotiations proceed. If the situation deteriorates, you may be required to take decisive action. Yes, sir, they responded in unison. This is different from the community center, Wallace continued gravely. These are hostile actors with firearms who have already demonstrated willingness to use them. 2 bank employees were wounded during the robbery attempt. If you're required to engage, it will be to neutralize lethal threats. Is that understood? Understood, sir, Cooper confirmed. Completely clear, sir, Rebecca echoed, her mind already shifting to the tactical considerations such a scenario presented. Within 30 minutes, they were positioned near the high school, receiving a briefing from the police tactical commander, Captain James Rivera. We've established communication with the hostage takers, Rivera explained, pointing to a school diagram. They're demanding a vehicle for escape and safe passage in exchange for the hostages. Obviously, we can't allow armed suspects to leave with a means of transportation, but we're maintaining dialogue to buy time. He indicated positions on the school's perimeter. We need overwatch coverage on all potential exit points. Captain Morgan, you'll take position here on the water tower overlooking the eastern exits. Lieutenant Cooper, you'll cover the northern approaches from the roof of the science building, which we've already secured. As Rebecca prepared her equipment, she couldn't help thinking about the strange symmetry of the situation. Once again, she and Cooper were positioned as counterparts in a crisis. Their competitive tension transformed into cooperative purpose. Captain, Cooper said, as they prepared to move to their positions. One other thing you should know, one of the hostage takers has been identified as Michael Delaney. The name hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Michael Delaney had been 3 years ahead of her at Riverdale High, a troubled teenager who had bullied younger students mercilessly. After graduation, he'd been in and out of prison for increasingly violent offenses. You know him? Cooper asked, nodding her reaction. From a long time ago, she confirmed. He was not a good person even then. Cooper nodded. Just thought you should be aware, given the potential for having to take a shot. Appreciated, Rebecca replied, refocusing on the mission. But it doesn't change anything. If he threatens those kids, I'll do what's necessary. As she climbed the water tower ladder to her designated position, Rebecca cleared her mind of everything except the task at hand. Setting up her rifle, she established communication with the command post and began her systematic surveillance of the area. Through her scope, she could see portions of the gymnasium where most of the hostages were being held. Frightened teenagers sat on the floor in groups, supervised by one of the armed men. The sight stirred a protective instinct that transcended professional duty. These were her community's children, in the very building where she had once been a student herself. For the next hour, Rebecca maintained her vigil, reporting movements and gathering intelligence that was relayed to the negotiation team. The situation remained tense but static, until a sudden burst of activity caught her attention. Movement at East Gymnasium door, she reported. One suspect with approximately 15 hostages. They appear to be relocating to the main building. Confirmed, came Cooper's voice. I can see them entering the administrative wing from my position. Captain Rivera's voice followed. They're splitting the hostages to complicate our response. Morgan maintained visual on the gymnasium. Cooper tracked the movement into the admin building. What happened next would test not only Rebecca's shooting skills, but her judgment and composure under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. A rapidly deteriorating situation with young lives hanging in the balance, and a split-second decision that would forever change how the people of Riverdale viewed the quiet captain who had returned from war only to find another battlefield waiting at home. From her elevated position on the water tower, Rebecca watched the situation deteriorate with clinical focus. The hostage-takers had grown increasingly agitated during negotiations, their movements becoming more erratic as FBI tactical teams were reported to be closing in on Riverdale. Suspect 1 becoming visibly unstable, she reported, observing Michael Delaney through her scope as he paced the gymnasium floor, gesturing wildly with his weapon toward the remaining hostages. Increased threat posture, weapon handling suggests escalating stress levels. Copy that, Captain Rivera acknowledged. Negotiator is trying to calm him down, but he's making additional demands for faster transportation. Rebecca adjusted her position slightly, ensuring she maintained the optimal angle while minimizing her visibility. Years of experience had taught her the value of patience in such situations, waiting for the perfect moment rather than forcing an imperfect one. Captain Morgan, Cooper's voice came through her earpiece. I've lost visual on Suspect 2. He moved deeper into the administrative wing with those hostages. Understood, she replied. I still have eyes on Suspects 1 and 3 in the gymnasium. The afternoon sun cast lengthening shadows across the school grounds as the standoff entered its 4th hour. Rebecca remained motionless, her body settled into the familiar stillness that allowed her to maintain position for extended periods without fatigue affecting her aim. All units be advised, Rivera announced suddenly. Negotiation has broken down. Suspect is demanding immediate transportation and threatening to execute hostages if not provided within 30 minutes. Rebecca felt the subtle shift in the mission parameters, from containment to potential intervention. Request permission to take shot if clear threat to hostages develops, she said, her voice steady. Stand by, Rivera responded. FBI tactical lead is being consulted. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Through her scope, Rebecca could see Delaney gesturing angrily at his phone, presumably on a call with the negotiators. The other armed man kept his weapon trained on the huddled students, many visibly crying or holding each other for comfort. All units, Rivera's voice returned, tension evident even through the professional cadence. FBI has authorized precision shooter intervention if hostages are placed in imminent danger. I repeat, you are cleared to engage only if a hostage's life is in immediate jeopardy. Understood, Rebecca acknowledged, her focus narrowing to the scene in her scope. Almost immediately, as if triggered by some unseen development in the negotiations, Delaney exploded in rage. Rebecca watched as he stormed toward the group of hostages, grabbing a young girl by the arm and dragging her to the center of the gymnasium floor. Even from this distance, Rebecca could see the girl's terror as Delaney pressed his pistol against her head. Suspect 1 has taken female hostage at gunpoint, Rebecca reported, her voice maintaining its professional detachment despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. Clear and present danger to hostage life. Do you have a shot? Rivera demanded. Rebecca assessed in microseconds, distance, angle, wind conditions, bystander positions. Affirmative, clean shot available. Stand by, came the response, confirming authorization. Through her scope, Rebecca could see Delaney shouting, his face contorted with anger as he pressed the weapon harder against the girl's temple. The hostage, Rebecca estimated her to be about 15, had her eyes squeezed shut, tears streaming down her face. Captain Morgan, you are cleared to engage, Rivera's voice came through with grim finality. Take the shot when ready. Rebecca's training took over completely. A measured exhale, the perfect pressure on the trigger, the momentary connection between shooter and target that existed outside of time. The rifle's report echoed across the school grounds as the bullet found its mark with unerring precision. Through her scope, she saw Delaney collapse instantly, the hostage falling to her knees in shock but unharmed. The third suspect, panicked by the sudden development, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender as police tactical teams surged into the gymnasium. Target neutralized, Rebecca reported calmly. Suspect 3 surrendering, hostages in gymnasium appear unharmed. Outstanding shot, Captain, Rivera confirmed. Teams moving to secure. His words were cut off by Cooper's urgent voice. Shots fired in administrative building. Suspect 2 is executing hostages. I don't have a clean shot from this position. Rebecca was already moving, rifle in hand, descending the water tower with controlled speed. I'm repositioning to east window of admin building, she reported. 30 seconds to new position. Copy that, Rivera responded tensely. All available units converge on administrative building. Rebecca reached ground level and sprinted toward the school's east wing, her movements precise despite the weight of her equipment. Reaching the position she had identified, a raised flower bed giving clear sightlines through the administrative office's windows, she set up in record time. Through her scope, she immediately assessed the situation. Suspect 2 had barricaded himself in the principal's office with 3 hostages, 2 students, and what appeared to be a teacher. One student already lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath them. The gunman was clearly unraveling, shouting and waving his weapon between the remaining hostages. "I have visual on suspect 2, Rebecca reported. 1 hostage down, 2 still at risk. Suspect is highly agitated, immediate threat to remaining hostages." "Can you take the shot?" Rivera asked urgently. Rebecca calculated quickly. "Negative. Glass interference and angle create high risk of collateral damage. Need better position." Making an instant decision, she identified an alternative approach, a maintenance access ladder leading to a narrow walkway that serviced the building's rooftop air conditioning units. It would provide a direct angle through the office skylight. "Moving to overhead position," she reported, already on the move again. "Need 60 seconds. Time compressed as Rebecca climbed the ladder and navigated the narrow walkway, setting up her rifle on the only stable surface available, a ventilation housing barely wide enough to support her position. Below, through the dirty skylight glass, she could see the crisis unfolding. The gunman had the teacher on her knees, weapon pressed to the back of her head, while the remaining student cowered in the corner. From this angle, Rebecca had a clear shot, if she could account for the skylight glass, which would alter the bullet's trajectory. "In position," she reported. "I have the shot but need to adjust for glass penetration." "Take it when ready," Rivera authorized without hesitation. Rebecca made the necessary calculations in seconds, the slight adjustment for the glass, the altered point of aim to compensate for deflection. It would be the most difficult shot of her career, with multiple lives hanging in the balance. As her finger tightened on the trigger, a sudden movement caught her attention. The teacher, seeing a potential opportunity as the gunman momentarily looked away, had begun to move. Rebecca instantly held her fire, recognizing the changed dynamics of the scene. Through her scope, she watched as the teacher suddenly lunged sideways, creating momentary confusion. The gunman turned, his weapon shifting away from its direct threat position, and Rebecca took her shot. The crack of her rifle was followed by the distinct sound of breaking glass as the bullet passed through the skylight with pinpoint accuracy, finding its target despite the multiple complications. Below, the gunman collapsed, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. "Target down," Rebecca reported. "Hostages secure, medical needed immediately for wounded student." The next hours passed in a blur of activity, tactical teams securing the building, medical personnel treating the wounded, shell-shocked students reuniting with frantic parents. Rebecca remained in professional mode throughout, delivering her after-action report with the same calm precision that had characterized her shooting. It was only later, as she finally returned to the reserve facility for debriefing, that the full weight of the day's events began to register. She had taken 2 lives, necessary actions to save many others, but still a burden she would carry. The debriefing room fell silent as she entered, Colonel Wallace and the other officers pausing in mid-conversation. For a moment, no one spoke, then Sergeant Major Hendricks stepped forward. "Captain Morgan," he said formally, but with unmistakable respect in his voice, "your actions today saved many lives. The wounded student is in surgery but expected to recover. The other hostages are safe because of your skill and courage." Rebecca nodded acknowledgement, too emotionally and physically drained for more. "There's something else you should know," Colonel Wallace said, stepping forward. His usual stern expression had softened somewhat. "The teacher you saved in that office, Melissa Thompson, she's my daughter. She told me how you waited for the perfect moment, how your shot was so precise that she was completely unharmed despite being only feet away from the gunman." Rebecca hadn't known the connection. "I was just doing my job, sir." "You did far more than that," Wallace replied, his voice uncharacteristically emotional. "You showed judgment and skill under pressure that goes beyond training. It's something I've failed to properly acknowledge in your service record." The colonel straightened, his decision visibly made. "Effective immediately, I'm appointing you and Lieutenant Cooper as co-leaders of the Precision Response Team. Your different backgrounds and experiences will complement each other, and provide the unit with the most comprehensive leadership possible. It was an unprecedented arrangement and a very public acknowledgement of his earlier misjudgment. Around the room, other officers nodded in approval. "Thank you, sir," Rebecca replied simply. "I'll do my best to justify your confidence." As the debriefing concluded, Cooper approached her. "That was some shooting today, Captain," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "The skylight shot in particular, I'm not sure I could have made that one." "You would have found a way," she replied, recognizing the significance of his admission. "That's what we do." He nodded, then extended his hand. "I look forward to building this team together. No more assumptions or preconceptions, just two soldiers with a job to do." Rebecca shook his hand, feeling the shift in their relationship from rivals to colleagues to something approaching friendship. "Agreed, Lieutenant. Fresh start." 2 weeks later, Rebecca entered McGuire's, the local diner that had been a Riverdale institution for generations. She had avoided public places since the school incident, uncomfortable with the attention that inevitably followed. But tonight was different, a private gathering of those involved in the rescue operations, away from media and formal ceremonies. As she opened the door and stepped inside, the buzz of conversation died immediately. Dozens of faces turned toward her, police officers, reserve personnel, teachers, and community members, all falling silent at once. For a heart-stopping moment, Rebecca thought she had misunderstood the invitation, that perhaps her presence wasn't welcome after all. Then Sheriff Davis, who had coordinated with the reserve unit during the crisis, stood and began to applaud. Others followed, rising to their feet in a wave of recognition that swept through the diner. These weren't the polite, obligatory applause of official ceremonies, but the genuine acknowledgement of a community toward one who had protected them when it mattered most. Rebecca saw her father among them, pride shining in his eyes. Cooper standing with several other officers, his respectful nod conveying more than words could. And in the back, Colonel Wallace with his daughter Melissa, both clapping with unmistakable emotion. "To Captain Morgan," Sheriff Davis called out, raising a glass. "Riverdale's own guardian angel." As the gathered crowd echoed the toast, Rebecca finally allowed herself to feel what she had been holding at bay. Not just the weight of responsibility, but the profound connection to this community that had shaped her, doubted her, and finally embraced her for exactly who she was. A soldier who had brought her hard-won skills home to protect the place and people she loved. In that moment of acceptance, Rebecca Morgan found a sense of peace that had eluded her since returning from combat. The door had opened on the wounded sniper, not just the physical door of the diner, but the metaphorical doors to recognition, respect, and belonging. The conversation had died, but in that silence was the most profound recognition a soldier could hope for. The acknowledgement that her sacrifice and service had meaning beyond medals and official commendations. It was, she realized as she finally took her seat among friends and colleagues, the homecoming she had been seeking all along, not in parades or ceremonies, but in the simple, powerful recognition from the community she had risked everything to protect.